Welcome. Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation on vaping. My name is Gina Johnson, and I am the Chemical Health Prevention Specialist with the Youth Service Bureau. Our world is continuously changing, and so is the tobacco world. I'm here today to update you on the new harms of vaping. This presentation will be to share about the new harms around vaping. My hope is for you to get an understanding of how conventional cigarettes and vaping products are similar. You have probably heard all your life how bad smoking is for you, and now it's time you hear how these harms are similar to vaping. We will do this by going over the history of tobacco, the health risks, COVID-19 exposure, and how we can prevent this. By now, you've probably heard the history or background on vaping, and if not, really quickly, vaping is a new term from 2010. These devices have boomed in popularity in the last 4 years among young adults, high school students, and middle schoolers. This has been very concerning due to the dangers of nicotine in the products and the limited regulations on the products. And with that quick history, I want to make sure we are all on the same page about the plant tobacco. Really, it's the plant that started it all. Tobacco use in plant form has been around for thousands of years. It was used as a healing medicine and was believed to cure everything. In the 1600s, it was even used as money. In the early 1600s, smoking tobacco started being promoted as a way to get one's daily dose of tobacco, whereas before you would maybe eat it or put it on yourself like a lotion. Today, we see that smoking is the most popular way of using this plant. The first major tobacco company started in 1760. The company's main focus was on cigars. Cigarettes didn't become popular until the 20th century. During World War II, cigarettes were given as rations for soldiers, just like food. And by the time they came home, the soldiers were hooked and tobacco companies were booming. It wasn't until the 1960s that the harmful health effects were being reported to the public. By then, millions were already addicted and dying from the diseases. In 1998, Minnesota won a huge lawsuit against the tobacco companies due to the lies they had been marketing for years. The companies also weren't sharing about all the horrible extra chemicals they had been putting into the cigarettes, which made users addicted faster and caused many of the cancers. Why is it important to share this information with you when we're supposed to be talking about vaping products? Because this is how vape companies are doing business now. They are being marketed as a healthy alternative to smoking, and the same tobacco companies who knew how harmful their products were are now selling e-cigarettes so they can cash in on the market. They are doing exactly what the cigarette and tobacco companies were doing for hundreds of years. Only now we know the hazardous health effects. Vape devices have many different names and appearances, but essentially are the same thing. Their formal name is Electronic Nicotine Delivery System, or ENDS for short. They are also called electronic cigarettes, e-cigars, and Juul. But I use vape devices to cover all of these products. As you can see on this slide, there are a variety of different vape devices, some that you've maybe seen before, and they come in a lot of different sizes and colors. A question I'm often asked is whether secondhand aerosol is a thing, and if we should be worried about it. Yes, just like secondhand smoke, it is not healthy for someone to breathe in or be near. It contains nicotine, ultrafine particles, and potential carcinogens, which are cancer-causing chemicals. So what is secondhand aerosol? It's the cloud that you see when a user exhales. In smoking, it's called smoke. For vaping, it's an aerosol. It was originally called vapor, but to some, that gave the wrong idea that it was just harmless water vapor. Health professionals have encouraged the term of aerosol to highlight that there are chemicals in this cloud. This picture illustrates just a few of the harmful chemicals you might find in the aerosol. In a British study called the Annual Asthma Survey, 14% of those with asthma said that vaping or exposure to secondhand aerosol trigger their asthma symptoms. This would mean coughing, maybe wheezing, and for some, it also can cause migraines because of the smells. This chart shows more chemicals that have been found in the aerosol of popular devices. It doesn't mean you will always find all of these chemicals, but you likely are going to find some or most of them. An activity that I like to do is to take some of these chemicals and compare them to what is found in cigarette smoke, such as acetone, lead, acetaldehyde, and formaldehyde. This helps illustrate that vaping and smoking are very similar. And the compounds you see in the orange are from the FDA being recognized as harmful or potentially harmful to our bodies. As you saw in the last slide, nicotine is found in these products. Nicotine is the main drug found in the tobacco plant. It is the addictive drug in cigarettes and most vape devices. And when you use these products, you are getting very high levels of nicotine. Some amount of nicotine is found in the products 98% of the time, even if it says 0%, and 100% of the time if they are a jewel. This is alarming because often young people don't realize that nicotine is even in the devices they're using. So what does nicotine do? When a user inhales nicotine, dopamine is released in our brains. Dopamine is a feel-good chemical that is already being released naturally in our brains. But when nicotine releases it, it is at a much higher level than what we are used to. I have a great video and a few slides that will show this. Nicotine is a stimulant, which means it gives our body a boost of energy. Nicotine is one of the most addicting drugs in the world. If you get too much nicotine, which is called Nicksick, it can cause you to vomit, get lightheaded, become very dizzy, and or pass out. This means you are actually overdosing on the drug nicotine. It's actually a really scary feeling to experience, and some have reported that they thought they were dying when they were experiencing this. It's important to know that if you do ever experience this, you need to let an adult know immediately. They may want to take you to a medical provider to get checked out. Another health consequence of vaping is a substance use disorder, or more commonly referred to as an addiction, which is a very serious lifelong disease that basically changes who we are. Some signs of a substance use disorder focused on vaping would be if you wake up and the first thing you have to do is vape, that's one sign. It's always going to be on your mind, something that you just can't shake, you have to keep thinking about. It makes you either crabby or irritable if you have to go more than 1 or a few hours without the product. And another sign would be that you have to go through great measures to hide it from your parents. If you recognize any of those signs, you might really want to reflect on your vaping use and talk to a professional about it.
It's important to understand that everyone in the world has addictions, or rather natural addictions, to things that are good, like food, water, and sleep. These natural addictions are important for our health and survival, and without them, we would not hunger or crave the things we need to survive. Now, we aren't exactly born with these natural addictions. Our body creates them. Let's look at an example. When you bite into an apple, your brain says, "Yum." Your brain recognizes that this apple is good for you. It has nutrition, vitamins, and gives your body the energy it needs to survive. Whenever the brain recognizes something that's good, it releases a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine causes you to experience pleasure. It's what makes you feel good, like when biting into an apple. The brain releases this dopamine in order to teach the body that this is healthy and good for your survival, and that it should remember to do it again. Now, there are other things we do that can release the pleasurable dopamine, like playing video games, exercising, or reading a good book. However, the amount of dopamine released during these activities is less than what's released when we eat food. The brain does this so it can recognize which is more important. So if you go 2 days without reading a book, or 2 days without eating food, your body is going to crave the food over the book. As such, your brain creates what's called a hierarchy of survival, which ranks how important each of these things is to your survival. Now, there are some things that will not cause the release of dopamine, like eating soap or punching yourself in the face. The brain knows that these things are not good and therefore does not release the pleasurable dopamine because your brain does not want you to do it again. Now, let's look at alcohol, marijuana, tobacco, and other drugs. These are all classified carcinogens, proven to cause cancer and other fatal diseases. Now, your brain should recognize that these things are harmful to your body. However, these substances have special chemical characteristics that fool the brain into releasing dopamine, oftentimes in much greater amounts than the body has ever experienced before. Because of this, the body is fooled into thinking that these things are good and important, sometimes even more important than food, water, or sleep, and consequently hijacks the number one spot in your survival hierarchy. So now, if you go 2 days without eating or 2 days without drinking alcohol, your body will actually crave the alcohol over the food. This is an extreme case of addiction, where the person addicted believes that they will die if they don't get it. The severity of the addiction depends on where the alcohol or drug lies within your hierarchy of survival, and can increase even with casual use. Research shows that people under the age of 21 are at the highest risk of having their survival hierarchy hijacked. Why? Because their brains are still growing and developing and are hypersensitive to false shocks of dopamine caused by these harmful substances. By 21, the brain is more fully developed and mature, and the survival hierarchy becomes more permanent and less susceptible to getting hijacked. The flip side is that once you are 21, it becomes very difficult to remove these harmful substances from your survival hierarchy. Studies show that 9 out of 10 people who currently struggle with addiction started drinking, smoking, or using before the age of 21. Understanding addiction as a preventable disease can help save millions of lives. The decision to wait until 21 could mean the difference between a life enslaved by addiction or a life full of success and accomplishment. Want to learn more? Visit us at wait21.org.
Another health effect would be that vaping hurts your lungs, heart, and blood vessels. Just like smoking cigarettes, it hurts our lungs and makes us more vulnerable to illness. It takes the nitric oxide out of our blood and damages our heart and blood vessels. This wasn't known until a year or two ago. We really didn't see similarities to vaping and smoking cigarettes until we started to look at our hearts and lungs and how they were being affected. The nicotine in these products will also impact how your brain develops. Because our brains are still developing until we're 25 for women and 28 for men, if you're going to use a harmful drug like nicotine or alcohol, it's going to impact that. You could also develop problems with focusing, impulse control, and motivation, all because your brain is developing those in middle school and high school. And if you're going to negatively impact that, then you're going to have a harder time focusing. You'll be less likely to control your impulses, and you're going to probably lack motivation. Just a quick quiz. What is one sign of nicotine poisoning? And this is something we just went over when we talked about Nicksick. A. Uncontrollable crying. B. Hallucinations. C. Dry mouth. Or D. Dizziness. If you said D, that is correct. Nicotine poisoning has multiple signs and can be very serious and scary. Like I mentioned earlier, I want to talk about the new harms we see with vaping and its relation to COVID 19. Two statistics that I found to be interesting were that young people who have ever vaped are 5 times more likely to develop COVID 19, and young people who have ever vaped and smoked, so that would be smoking cigarettes, are 7 times more likely to develop COVID 19. Overall, smoking or vaping increases someone's risk for COVID 19 because anytime you use drugs, it will suppress your immune system, making it easier to get sick and it will take longer to heal. Just like how we know that those who reported smoking and were hospitalized due to pneumonia from COVID 19, they were less likely to recover. The risk of getting COVID 19 also increases from how you are using the product. The more you are touching the device and then putting it up to your mouth will expose you to more germs, which increases your chance of getting COVID 19. Not to mention, if you were to share your device with someone else, it might also transmit the virus from person to person, which I would highly discourage ever sharing different products like that, especially now. But on a more empowering note, going smoke free or vape free can cause our lungs to have a normal immune response to an infection and can prevent inflammation in the lungs. This is good news because if you were to quit vaping or smoking right now, in the next couple of weeks, you'll already start feeling your lungs are getting healthier. Now that we've talked about vaping nicotine, let's briefly talk about vaping marijuana. This is a quick overview of marijuana, so if you'd like to learn more about it, the Youth Service Bureau also has presentations on their YouTube page. THC is the mind altering component found in marijuana that gets you high. Not to be confused with CBD, which is found in marijuana but does not get you high. Marijuana, like nicotine, is also an addictive drug. 1 in 6 youth who use will become addicted, compared to 1 in 8 adults. When using marijuana, it causes a decrease in reaction time, memory problems, and in higher doses, such as vaping it can cause paranoia or psychosis. This is a great image that shows just how much of our brains are affected by marijuana use. And remember, if you are using THC concentrates, which has really high levels of THC, it can be cause for a felony, which is a very serious legal consequence and one that you might have to live with for a very long time. A felony might cost you a scholarship to college, your right to vote, and the possibility of getting certain jobs. I really want you to think about the consequences that I just mentioned before you think about using marijuana. Maybe you think, I'm not going to listen to her because everyone in my school vapes nicotine or marijuana. But looking at this data, that's really not the case. Looking at the Minnesota Student Survey data that came out in 2019, 18.5% of ninth graders in Washington County have vaped in the past 30 days. Another way of looking at that number is saying 81.5% of ninth graders choose not to vape regularly. Often we believe the numbers of those using are much higher than they actually are. And that's really the case with high school students, middle school students, and adults everywhere around the world. It's just because of how we talk about use and how much we see it in newspapers, the news, TV. It kind of seems like it's everywhere. But really, a huge majority of the population are not using any type of drug. So I just want you to remember that. And interestingly enough, studies are showing that the amount of students who vape has been decreasing in the last few months, which is great news. Now, just thinking back to that last slide, how many ninth graders are vaping in Washington County? Is it A, 2%, B, 110%, C, 18.5%, or D, no way of knowing? If you said 18.5%, then you would be correct. And like I said, another way of saying that is 81.5% of ninth graders are not vaping. There are a lot of ways you can prevent an addiction or experimentation with drugs. Have a group of friends that can have the same values as you. Be a part of a team that can challenge and motivate you. And also finding out what drives you and go do it. Have goals, big or small. The biggest factor I'm going to talk about today is our mental health. Mental health is one of the biggest reasons why people use drugs. They think that it might numb their emotions and feelings. And that might be true for a very short period of time, but it's really just putting a band-aid on the problem. It's not actually solving it. Once you come out of that high, you are still going to have the same stress or problems you had before. So let's learn ways on how to manage our stress so that this doesn't happen to us. Think about what stresses you out. It could be little things or big things. I think right now we are all a little more stressed than we'd like to be. Now, think about what usually calms you down. Do you excuse yourself and go for a quick walk around the block? Do you write in a journal all about the crummy day you've had? Learning what makes us stress can help us identify ways to handle that stress. Thinking about what can calm us down are things that we can put in our mental toolbox so we can pull them out when we do get stressed. If we can come up with healthy ways to put a stop to our negative feelings, stress, and depression, then we are less likely to ever see a need to turn to drugs. Here on this slide are healthy coping skills. We can turn to these healthy highs instead of the unhealthy ones like bullying, using drugs, or acting out. Some of these examples would be do an activity you enjoy, such as journaling, yoga, running, playing soccer, and then getting some kind of physical activity every day. You can go to changetochill.org to learn of even more healthy coping skills that are tailored to you. In the end, some takeaways would be remembering that nicotine is the same drug found in cigarettes as found in vape devices, and that nicotine comes from the tobacco plants. Becoming addicted to vape devices and nicotine is a very serious consequence to using these products. Drugs decrease our immune function, making it easier to get COVID-19 or other illnesses. There are many healthy ways to cope with stress. And I didn't state this before, but just as a reminder, it is illegal for anyone under the age of 21 to use, purchase, or have any type of vape devices on them. And it's always important to know that there are resources out there to help you. You can text QUIT to this number. You can go to mylifemyquit.com and it's a free help tailored to teens. Like I mentioned earlier, you can go to changetochill.org and it has a lot of information and ways to help manage your mental health. And then Matt McCune is the South Washington County District High School Chemical Health Specialist. You can meet with him virtually to talk about problems you are facing around drugs. You can just email him at the email on the screen and let him know that you'd like to have a meeting with him or talk to him. And remember that at the end of the day, you have the power to make your own choices. What I encourage you to do is know the facts and make decisions that you feel good about. Don't make a decision based on the fact that you think everyone else is doing these bad choices, because guess what? Most people really aren't. And make sure you can talk to an adult that you trust. There are a lot of influences and pressures you have to deal with, but there are plenty of adults like Matt McCune, the chemical health specialist, who you can talk to about this stuff without judgment. So I want to thank you, and please make sure that you check out YSB's other YouTube videos to learn more about our services and educational presentations, like the ones I mentioned earlier on marijuana, other ones on vaping, and other drugs as well. You can go to Youth Service Bureau, Inc. on YouTube and find all of our presentations.